今天呢说完了跟这个哈斯相关的话题之外呢，我们再来回到思想先驱报啊。思想先驱报今天的形式跟这个往常有一些不一样。那么在上周五呢，李奇缺席一天，但是呢提前给大家上了一道小菜，就是今天思想先驱报我们要讨论的一篇文章。这一篇文章呢是发表在外交关系事务期刊上，外交事务就是由外交关系委员会主办的啊，这个是两者之间的联系。发表在外交事务上的这样的一篇长文，其中就讲到了一个问题，就是说习近平的经济政策，我们看历史以来提出了很多不管是共同富裕也好，房住不炒也好，还是现在的消费转型也好，往往都有一个特点，就是什么呢？提出的时候轰轰烈烈，但是中间呢就受到了阻力，受到阻力之后就不做了。因此作者就做出了一个大胆的判断，说这一次消费转型也是不可能成功的。而到底为什么不可能成功呢？作者在文章中就进行了分析。这一篇文章呢，我们已经整理为大家进行简单的编译和播报。在今天稍后的思想先驱报中，我们就这一篇文章来进行更多的评论。当然在这之前呢，有一个消息也是引起了大家很多的关注，就是美国国务院更新了赴华旅行警报，其中特别提到中国最近推出的对外关系法和之前的反间谍法，导致了外国商界办公室被突袭。而同时呢在这个没有遵循公正和透明的法律程序的情况下，对于美国公民也出现了实施更多出境禁令的这样的一个情况。这样的一份对华旅行警报特别表示，在中华人民共和国旅行或者是已经居住的美国公民，如果出现问题，可能会被面临任意拘留，甚至有可能没有办法获得正当的美国领事服务，也没有办法了解他们所被指控的犯罪行为的信息。特别指出，现在在中国当局那里似乎有广泛的裁量权，各种各样的文件也好，数据也好，统计材料也好，都被视为国家机密，以此来拘留和起诉外国人，指控他们进行间谍活动。因此，基于以上中国出现的最新情况，建议美国人不要到中国去旅行。这样的一个消息一出最开始是发到记者的邮箱里面的，那么记者呢很快把这个消息播放出来那么今天早上更多的媒体也就此事进行了相关的通报，目前似乎是对所有在中国居住的美国公民所发出的这样的一个集体的警告。这样的一个信息我们到底应该怎样理解？何明先生？
很难受很难受的一个原因就是还不在于美国是不是过高的发出了这个调子，是不是跟中美关系有什么问题，我还不是这么看。我觉得中国现在最大的一个问题就是为了自己的政权安全也好，或者国家利益也好，意识形态也好，建立的某一些法律法规，甚至在某一些措施令人真的搞不清楚这个国家经过了30多年的改革开放，已经积累了这么多的财富，有这么多人对世界的文明价值有了基本的了解，不是说你这个国家继续要走向美国式的或者加拿大式的或者欧洲式的这个民主，但是你即算是一个传统的国家，对一个法治都应该有基本的敬畏。什么叫基本的敬畏？这一个法不是那么容易的，因为一个法如果得不到大家的充分的讨论和最终的参与和认可，你这个法律建立起来，你要么这法律就不知道你要干什么，第二个就是说呢，你这个法律是不是有真的这个可行性就是说你无限的一个法律上的一个惩罚的这么一个剑你是不是随时落到人的头上，我们并不知道，但是是有这种可能性的。而且这些年很多人在中国大陆的旅行的时候要么你就莫名其妙被抓了，要么你就莫名其妙被边控了要么你就到现在为止还是下落不明，要么呢你的案件就一推再推，不能这个审理。所以这些情况你也许说就很大的人数来讲，它是个孤立的数字，很多老百姓可能感受到不了这一点，但是对于一个西方人来讲，或者是生活在一个法治的国家的人来讲，这是很难接受的，因为他根本不知道这个他是不是真的会掉到陷阱里面来。中国现在的某一些这一类的措施 真的是搞不清楚这个习近平或者是中国政府是怎么看待这个法治的问题？这个法治是成为他的政权的一个真正的保护壳，还是实际上这种伤害了这个政权本身应有的受人尊重的一个力量你而不是呢利用这个力量去吓唬别人，这个事情还需要观察，但是整体来讲是令人困惑的，是令人这个沮丧的，是令人值得我们来关注和讨论的，也应该把一些不同的这个声音能够让中国的决策者知道这个法不是这么随便立的。
好，谢谢和平先生的评价那么说到现在中国经济面临的问题其实不仅仅是西方的商界对于中国经济到底发生了什么有很多的困惑，对于中国的法律最近出现的改变到底用意何在有很多的疑惑。身边的现在在中国的国内的这一些不管是这个从事学术行业的、从事商业行业的、法律行业的各界人士，在谈到自己国家前途未来的时候往往也有这样的一种怅惘感大家往往呢，因为在中国国内这个环境中不会发出我们在海外一些无厘头的一些媒体上看到的今天垮台明天倒台，没有这样的一些说法。但是你仔细问，大家往往都有这样的一种迷茫感，就是这个国家的方向到底往哪个方向走。特别是在过去几十年，大家都觉得特别充满了干劲只要你努力想挣钱，那么这个苍天不负有心人，总是能够不断的顺着社会的阶梯往上爬。但是近期一次又一次的事件，特别是现在整个的年轻人如果用一个词来形容，就是一种无力感，不知道自己到底未来奔头在哪里，也不知道这个国家再待下去还有没有向好转的可能。我特别关注到的是来自大西洋月刊的一篇文章，那这一篇文章就给中国这一代起了一个名字，叫做悲伤一代，或者叫乐观不在的一代。其中就说中国人呢其实早就没有上街去抗议的习惯和激情了，但是中国人还有抗议的方式，他们怎么抗议呢？用钱包、用子宫，还有用自己的脚和护照来抗议。今天的思想先驱报中我们也会为大家一起介绍大西洋月刊这一篇文章中的观点，看一看与您所感受到的中国现在的这种现实的思想风潮是不是有契合之处。在今天节目的最后我们要为大家带来的是我们之前在节目中提到的美国的中情局局长伯恩斯先生在刚刚过去的这周末，在英国的迪特利公园或者叫做迪切利公园所进行的一次演讲。这个昨天呢，我第一时间找到了在迪切利公园演讲的这一段视频那么首先呢，我就去他们的网站上，因为我要跟他们要版权这样的一个版权许可，结果发现人家很大方版权直接是对公众开放的，所以没有问题。我仔细看这个视频这个我怎么形容呢？就是让我有一点就是看95年、98年《西游记》的这个感觉。因为呢，到现在，因为我们都用高清镜头录这种视频，你感觉这个画面的效果是不一样的。这个视频呢，你感觉是发黄的带着余光的这样的一个虚拟的视频。我不知道这个英国的这个皇室是不是这个镜头是不能换的有这样的一种虚拟的就感觉是时光深处的这样的一个不真实感。而且这个伯恩斯先生发言的这个地方并不是像我们这样的一个舞台也不是我们说这个智库这样的一个讲台，都不是，真的是在一个公园外景实拍。这个公园风景之美，我看了半天，我一直以为它身后是一块绿幕，后来我看到这个水在动我才知道真的是实景，所以也体现了
也可以动，
也可以做到水实景，所以大家也判断看这到底是绿幕还是实景但是呢，如果大家对于迪切利庄园有所了解的话，就会知道的确历史深远的，大家知道的丘吉尔包括之前的英女王都在这里做过非常重要的讲话和演讲。伯恩斯先生更是我们之前在节目中数次提到的，可以说是美国外交界的一个能臣那么同时呢，他现在呢做美国的中情局局长，在情报领域也有非常出色的贡献，特别是在俄乌战争期间，之前在节目中我们已经为大家进行了详细的介绍。那么在这个介绍伯恩斯先生的时候呢，来自英国方面的这一位人士也说呢，我在请到这个伯恩斯先生到我们现场之前呢，我也特别的去打探我也收集一些情报，看一看跟伯恩斯先生共事的这一些人对于他有什么评价。结果呢，发现对于他是众口一词的极其高的评价， 最好的外交官，没有比他更好的人了，是我跟打交道中最聪明的人，等等等等。因此啊，我的这个情报收集努力没有获得更多有意义的信息。他同时说啊，伯恩斯先生其实呢是会说多门语言，这与他自身的外交生涯有关啊，会说阿拉伯语等等等等。说今天呢，他呢可以说是赏我们的一个面子，用他的第4语言英语为我们进行演讲啊，有非常有趣的、幽默的这样的一段介绍。那么伯恩斯先生到底说了一些什么样的内容呢？他又就现在的瓦格纳政变，中情局所掌握的信息和后续的行动，对于中国又做出了怎样的评价呢？这就是今天我们在节目结束之后，在华尔街联报要为大家带来的内容。今天最重要的环节，感谢诸多给我们打赏的观众朋友们，感谢明哲，感谢淡泊，感谢如是我们，感谢金山，感谢甜点，感谢我是 ZZ， 感谢周周，谢谢这些观众朋友们对于我们的支持。明天同一时间远程连线华尔街论坛与您不见不散。
Good afternoon, Lords, ladies and gentlemen. It's fantastic to have you here physically here at
James, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this, our 59th annual lecture. It's wonderful to see you all here, with Ditchley looking its best, drawing together old friends and new, helping us to think new thoughts and make new connections, just as our founder, Sir David Wills, had always envisaged. But as we've been gathering beforehand, there is, of course, one old friend whom we sorely miss this year, Catherine Wills, who died too young last September. And in her quiet, shy, but very determined way, Catherine was our guiding spirit for over 20 years. And there was never any fuss or nonsense with Catherine, but she was always there, ready with a thoughtful touch on the tiller, encouraging and supporting us all. Ditchley gave her such great pleasure, and I know that she was really proud to see it flourish in recent years under the leadership of our director, James Arroyo. Indeed, it was her confidence in James that helped shape her final act of encouragement and support for Ditchley, the extraordinarily generous bequest she left us in her will. And in her mischievous way, not long before she died, she said to James that she would be leaving Ditchley a little something. Well, the little something turned out not to be little at all. In fact, it turned out to be rather a big something. So big indeed that it amounts to a second founding of Ditchley. And I think amongst ourselves we used to talk of Catherine as carrying on her father's work. Now, because of the extent of her generosity, we need to think of Ditchley as equally being Catherine's work. So it's now our responsibility, supported by Catherine's cousin Rob Wills as the new family trustee, to take forward Catherine's vision for Ditchley. And I'm sure that today of all days, her spirit is sitting here with us in the front row. And on behalf of everyone here, Catherine, thank you for all you did for Ditchley. Now, what is so exciting about her legacy is that it will enable us to build on the strong foundations that James has already helped to put down. This year, we've been strengthening our ties with American and Canadian Ditchley, which continue to give us generous support. And a very warm welcome to our American friends who are here today in strong numbers. Our new European venture, Ditchley Deutschland, about which we are extremely excited, is up and running and had its first conference last week in Frankfurt. So I think that at this time of complexity and change, Ditchley is proving its worth, the antidote we need to short-termism and performative politics. And here we're doing more, better in our program, with our networks, with our technology, and of course in all the work going on in the House that I hope some of you will have seen. So on behalf of the Ditchley Council of Management, I'd like to thank James and Kerry and the whole team here at Ditchley for all that they do as we prepare for the even more ambitious phase that lies ahead. So if here we like to think that we stand for seriousness and the desire to build understanding, there is no one who has better illustrated those values in their career than Director Bill Burns, whom I'm delighted to welcome today. Or perhaps I should say welcome back, since he is no stranger to Ditchley, or indeed to Oxford, where he studied as a Marshall Scholar. Now, Bill has already, in my view, fulfilled the most crucial task of any annual lecturer. He's turned up, which, given the events of last week in Russia, didn't seem at all certain at points during this week. And it's particularly nice that he's been joined by his wife, Ambassador Lisa Carty, who is the US representative to the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations, and I'd like to welcome her too to Ditchley. So, garlanded with honours, indeed the highest honours that the American diplomatic service can bestow, Bill held the highest rank in the Foreign Service, Career Ambassador, that it is possible to hold. He was only the second career diplomat in the history to become the Deputy Secretary of State, and when he left the Foreign Service in 2014, he became President of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Then, 2021, he was recalled to the colours as Director of the CIA, the first ever career diplomat to hold that office. With such a career, such a record, I obviously felt it was my duty to try to find a dissenting voice, maybe some compromise, I think it's called. So in the best traditions of the CIA, I thought I'd try to acquire some intel from the diplomatic community. As we all know, a cynical, jaded and competitive bunch. Who better to dish the dirt than the kind of people who come to Ditchley? So after a bit, my sources started to come back to me with their reports. The most remarkable thing about Bill, said the first one, is that it is impossible to find a foreign minister who has other than high regard for him. From a very senior diplomat, he is my favourite diplomat and the best of his generation. From another source, he is not someone to be trifled with. He's an incredibly nice guy, but beneath that, he is tough and determined. One person sent me a quote from former Secretary of State James Baker, who described Bill as simply one of the finest US diplomats of the last half century. And that person said, "Yup, that is the Bill Burns I know." They also told me his father once wrote Bill a letter saying, "Nothing can make you prouder than serving your country with honour." That, they said, exemplifies Bill in my mind. So you can see I failed comprehensively on the compromat. And I know that even the Iranians and Russians regard him with great respect. One other thing struck me about the people who wrote endorsements for Bill's memoir, The Back Channel, available at all good bookshops. 7 former Secretaries of State, Kissinger, Baker, Shultz, Rice, Albright, Kerry and Clinton, all endorsed the book. But most importantly to me, that was across the political divide. And in today's polarising world, it was a sign not just of the very high regard in which Bill is held, but a refreshing reminder that things can be different, as we know here at Ditchley. Now, Bill speaks Russian, Arabic and French. As a special concession to me, he's kindly agreed to talk to us today in his 4th language, English. With his background and experience, his deep personal knowledge of the situation in Russia and Ukraine, it is not hyperbole to say that there really is no one better placed than he to talk to us on the theme of a world transformed and the role of intelligence. There is certainly no one we would rather have here with us today at Ditchley, And so it is with great pleasure that I invite Director Burns to give us this year's annual lecture.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks so much for that very kind introduction and for welcoming me back to Ditchley. I first came here in 1979 as a young and unformed Marshall Scholar at Oxford with just enough cash to rent a black tie for the formal conference dinner and buy a bus ticket. I must admit that my memory of the conference itself is hazy, but the effect it had on me was profound. It gave me an enduring appreciation of the power and purpose of the transatlantic alliance and of the particular significance of Anglo-American partnership. A decade later, I was a career American diplomat working for Secretary of State James Baker. It was one of those rare plastic moments in history, moments which come along only a few times each century. The Cold War was ending, the Soviet Union was about to collapse, Germany would soon be reunified, and Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait would soon be defeated. It was a world of uncontested American primacy. History's currents seemed to flow inexorably in our direction, the power of our ideas driving the rest of the world in a slow but irresistible surge toward democracy and free markets. Our sometimes overbearing self-assurance seemed well-grounded in the realities of power and influence, but it also obscured other gathering trends. Our moment of post-Cold War dominance was never going to be a permanent condition. History had not ended, nor had ideological competition. Globalization held great promise for human society, with hundreds of millions of people lifted out of poverty, but it was also bound to produce counter-pressures. In a transition memo that I drafted for the incoming Clinton administration at the end of 1992, I tried to capture the dim outlines of the challenges ahead. While for the first time in 50 years we do not face a global military adversary, I wrote, it is certainly conceivable that a return to authoritarianism in Russia or an aggressively hostile China could revive such a global threat. I tried, however imperfectly, to highlight the risks that democracies and free markets would inevitably face in a world in which economies were globalizing, but as I put it at the time, the international political system was tilting schizophrenically toward greater fragmentation. And I tried as best I could to sketch the shared global threats already posed by climate change and global health insecurity, especially the then raging HIV/AIDS epidemic. For the next quarter century, I remained a proud and very fortunate American diplomat, serving mostly in Russia and the Middle East and in senior positions in Washington. I shared in diplomatic successes and made my share of mistakes. As America's unipolar moment faded, and some of what I had tried to foresee in that long ago transition memo began to unfold. Today, as director of the Central Intelligence Agency, I'm afraid to say that I've now lived and served long enough to face another plastic moment in a world that is far more crowded, complicated, and contested than the one I experienced in those heady days as a young diplomat 3 decades ago. It is a world in which the United States is no longer the only big kid on the geopolitical block, a world in which humanity faces both peril and promise. My job now is to help President Biden and senior policymakers understand and shape a world transformed. So what I'd like to do this afternoon is sketch the main features of the new landscape before us and what it means for the role of intelligence. We are, as President Biden reminds us, at an inflection point. The post-Cold War era is definitely over. Our task is to shape what comes next, investing in our foundational strengths and working in common cause with our unmatched network of alliances and partnerships, to leave for future generations a world that is more free, open, secure, and prosperous. That is a very tall order. Our success will depend on our ability to navigate a world with 3 distinctive features. First is the challenge of strategic competition from a rising and ambitious China and from a Russia which constantly reminds us that declining powers can be at least as disruptive as rising ones. Second are the problems without passports, like the climate crisis and global pandemics, which are beyond the reach of any one country to address and are growing more extreme and existential. And third is the revolution in technology, which is transforming how we live, work, fight, and compete with possibilities and risks we can't yet fully grasp. Those singular challenges sometimes conflict with one another, with cooperation on shared global problems both more vital and more difficult, too often the victim of strategic competition. And the revolution in technology is both a main arena for that competition and a phenomenon in which some basic partnership is crucial to set rules of the road to maximize the benefits of emerging technologies and minimize their dangers. The most immediate and acute geopolitical challenge to international order today is Vladimir Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the biggest war in Europe since Winston Churchill sat in his bedroom here at Ditchley dictating wartime messages to Franklin Roosevelt. I've spent much of the past 2 decades trying to understand and counter the combustible combination of grievance, ambition, and insecurity that Putin embodies. That experience has not only contributed to all this gray hair, it has also given me a healthy dose of humility about pontificating about Putin and Russia. But one thing I have learned is that it is always a mistake to underestimate Putin's fixation on controlling Ukraine and its choices, without which he believes it is impossible for Russia to be a major power or him to be a great Russian leader. That tragic and brutish fixation has already brought shame to Russia and exposed its weaknesses, and evoked the breathtaking determination and resolve of the Ukrainian people. Putin often insists that Ukraine is not a real country, that it is weak and divided. Well, as he has discovered, real countries fight back. And that is what Ukrainians have done with remarkable courage and tenacity, as I've seen in frequent travels to Kyiv over the course of the war. They will not relent, nor will all of us who support Ukraine. Putin's war has already been a strategic failure for Russia. Its military weaknesses laid bare, its economy badly damaged for years to come, its future as a junior partner and economic colony of China being shaped by Putin's mistakes, its revanchist ambitions blunted by a NATO which has only grown bigger and stronger. This time last Saturday, we were all riveted by the scenes of Yevgeny Prigozhin's armed challenge to the Russian state, with Wagner paramilitary forces briefly seizing Rostov and moving 2/3 of the way to Moscow before turning back. As President Biden has made clear, this is an internal Russian affair in which the United States has had and will have no part. It is striking that Prigozhin preceded his actions with a scathing indictment of the Kremlin's mendacious rationale for the invasion of Ukraine and of the Russian military leadership's conduct of the war. The impact of those words and those actions will play out for some time, a vivid reminder of the corrosive effect of Putin's war on his own society and his own regime. Russia's aggression poses a formidable test, but China is the only country with both the intent to reshape the international order and increasingly the economic, diplomatic, military, and technological power to do so. China's transformation over the past 5 decades has been extraordinary. It is a transformation for which the Chinese people deserve the credit, and one which our country supported because, as Foreign Secretary Cleverly eloquently said in April at Mansion House, a stable, prosperous, and peaceful China is good for Britain and good for the world. The issue, therefore, is not China's rise per se, but the actions which accompany it. President Xi is embarking on his 3rd term with more power than any Chinese leader since Mao. And rather than use that power to reinforce, revitalize, and update the international system that enabled China's transformation, he seeks to rewrite it. In the intelligence profession, we study carefully what leaders say, but we pay special attention to what they do. And here, President Xi's growing repression at home and his aggressiveness abroad, from his no-limits partnership with Putin to his threats to peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait, are impossible to ignore. What's also impossible to ignore is the fact that in this new era, our competition is taking place against the backdrop of thick economic interdependence and commercial ties. That has served our countries, our economies, and our world remarkably well. But it has also created strategic dependencies, critical vulnerabilities, and serious risks to our security and our prosperity. COVID made clear to every government the danger of being dependent on any one country for life-saving medical supplies, just as Putin's aggression in Ukraine has made clear to every government the risks of being dependent on one country for energy supplies. In today's world, no country wants to find itself at the mercy of a cartel of one for critical minerals and technologies, especially a country that has demonstrated the will and capacity to deepen and weaponize those dependencies. The answer to that is not to decouple from an economy like China's, which would be foolish, but to sensibly de-risk and diversify by securing resilient supply chains, protecting our technological edge, and investing in industrial capacity. In a more volatile and uncertain world in which power is more diffuse, the weight of the hedging middle is growing, economically, politically, and militarily. Democracies and autocracies, developed and developing economies, and countries from the global south and other parts of the globe are intent on diversifying their relationships in order to expand their strategic autonomy and maximize their options. These countries see little benefit and lots of risk in monogamous geopolitical relationships. Instead, we're likely to see more countries pursue more open relationships than we were accustomed to over several post-Cold War decades of unipolarity. And if past is precedent, we ought to be attentive to rivalries between so-called middle powers, which have often been the match that ignited collisions between major powers. We do not have the option of focusing on a single geopolitical pacing threat. We face an equal threat to international order and indeed to the lives and livelihoods of our people from shared or transnational challenges, of which the climate crisis poses the most clear and present danger. We can no longer talk about tipping points and catastrophic climate impacts in the future tense. They are here and now, imperiling our planet, our security, our economies, and our people. Last month in Washington, D.C., you could not see across the Potomac River from CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, or take a breath without subjecting your lungs to hazardous materials because of smoke from hundreds of wildfires across Canada. Climate change is the quintessential threat multiplier, fueling energy, health, water, and food insecurities, setting back our progress on economic and human development, turbocharging what is already the worst period of forced displacement and migration in history, and further exacerbating instability and geopolitical tensions and flashpoints. These two threats, geopolitical and transnational, are impossible to disentangle. We have to be honest, as I noted before. Competition in many ways makes cooperation more difficult, but we're going to have to do both. To outcompete our rivals and still deliver on shared challenges, our leaders will need to deal with another immensely powerful force, a revolution in technology more profound than the Industrial Revolution or the dawn of the nuclear age. Advances in computing-related technologies, from chips to quantum to artificial intelligence, are leading to breakthroughs of remarkable scale and scope. In just a few short months since the first public version of ChatGPT debuted last November, we've seen newer models outperform humans in graduate-level entrance exams and in assessments of doctor-to-patient engagements in medical training programs. We see this hockey stick trend line time and again, outstripping our expectations, our imaginations, and our capacity to govern the use of enormously powerful technologies, for good or for ill. Nowhere is that more evident than in biotechnology and biomanufacturing, which can unlock extraordinary climate and health solutions and boost our economies, but whose abuse and misuse could lead to catastrophe. Leadership in technology and innovation has underpinned our economic prosperity and military strength. It has also been critical to setting rules, norms, and standards that safeguard our interests and our values. Our Chinese rivals understand that as well as anyone, and it is therefore no surprise that they are investing heavily in emerging technologies as a central dimension of our strategic competition. Strategic competition, common transnational imperatives, and a revolution in technology without precedent in human history make for a hugely complicated international landscape. It certainly keeps my nostalgia for diplomacy and policymaking under control, but it also sharpens my focus on transforming how we approach the role of intelligence in this transformed world. Across the CIA and the U.S. intelligence community, we're working hard to meet this moment with the urgency and creativity it requires. Let me offer a few examples, from the challenges of strategic competition with Russia and China, to initiatives to harness emerging technologies, invest in the people who animate the CIA, and build the intelligence partnerships which will shape our future. I'm proud of the work that CIA and our partners across the U.S. intelligence community have done to help President Biden and senior policymakers, and especially Ukrainians themselves, thwart Vladimir Putin's aggression in Ukraine. And I'm proud of our close partnership with our British allies, in particular the women and men of the Secret Intelligence Service, led by my friend Sir Richard Moore, for whom I have the greatest respect. Together, we provided early and accurate warning of the war that was coming, the essential function of any intelligence service. When the president sent me to Moscow before the war in early November of 2021, I found Putin and his principal advisors unmoved by the clarity of our understanding of what he was planning, convinced that the window was closing for his opportunity to dominate Ukraine. I left even more troubled than when I arrived. Good intelligence has helped President Biden mobilize and sustain a strong coalition of countries in support of Ukraine. Good intelligence has helped Ukraine defend itself with such remarkable bravery and resolve, and to launch the crucial counteroffensive that is now underway. And the careful declassification of some of our secrets, part of a novel and effective strategy shaped by the president and senior policy officials, has helped deny Putin the false narratives that I have watched him so often invent in the past, putting him in the uncomfortable and unaccustomed position of being on his back foot. Disaffection with the war will continue to gnaw away at the Russian leadership beneath the steady diet of state propaganda and practiced repression. That disaffection creates a once-in-a-generation opportunity for us at CIA, at our core, a human intelligence service. We're not letting it go to waste. We recently used social media, our first video post to Telegram, in fact, to let brave Russians know how to contact us safely on the dark web. We had 2.5 million views in the first week, and we're very much open for business. If Putin's war in Ukraine is the most immediate challenge in strategic competition, Xi Jinping's China is our biggest geopolitical and intelligence rival and most significant long-term priority. We've been organizing ourselves at CIA over the past couple of years to reflect that priority. We've set up a new mission center, one of the dozen or so organizational building blocks of the agency, focused exclusively on China. It is the only single-country mission center we have at CIA, and it provides a central mechanism for coordinating work on the China mission, which extends today to every part of CIA. I learned long ago that priorities aren't real unless budgets follow them. That's why we've concentrated substantially more resources on intelligence collection, operations, and analysis on China, more than doubling the percentage of our overall budget supporting China activities over just the last 2 years. We're hiring and training more Mandarin speakers, and we're stepping up efforts across the world to compete with China, from Latin America to Africa to the Indo-Pacific. We've also sought to quietly strengthen intelligence channels with China, including through my own travels. These discrete channels are an important means of ensuring against unnecessary misunderstandings and inadvertent collisions, and complementing and supporting policymaking channels such as Secretary Blinken's recent visit to Beijing. Even as Russia and China consume much of our attention, we cannot afford to neglect other pressing challenges on today's new and complicated landscape, from counterterrorism to regional instability. Hardly a day goes by when I'm not reminded that CIA is an agency with global responsibilities and global reach. As we meet here this afternoon, our officers are doing hard jobs in hard places around the world, often operating in the shadows, out of sight and out of mind. The risks they take and the sacrifices they make rarely well understood. The successful U.S. strike last summer against Ayman al-Zawahiri, the co-founder and former leader of al-Qaeda, was a reminder of the capability and determination still focused on terrorist threats. For many years to come, we will have to perform a delicate balancing act, juggling renewed major power rivalry with all sorts of other challenges. Meanwhile, we're transforming our approach to emerging technology issues. We've created a second new mission center focused on technology and transnational challenges. It is already significantly expanding our partnerships with the private sector, without which we will not be able to keep pace with intelligence rivals like China or keep ahead of them. We've also established a new Chief Technology Officer position, a first for CIA, and CIA Labs, another new program, supports research and development in crucial technologies with academic and private sector partners. Our in-house talent remains superb. More than 60 years ago, CIA pioneered the technical collection capabilities of the U-2 reconnaissance aircraft. We were an early investor in the technology you now know as Google Earth. And our specialists also developed the precursors to the lithium-ion batteries that power your smartphones today. We're constantly looking for the next breakthrough. We're also in the midst of the most profound transformation of espionage tradecraft since the Cold War. In an era of smart cities and ubiquitous technical surveillance, spying is a formidable challenge. For a CIA officer working overseas in a hostile country, meeting sources who are risking their own safety to provide us information, constant surveillance is a very risky business. But the same technology that sometimes works against us, whether it's mining big data to expose patterns in our activities or massive camera networks, can also be made to work for us and against our rivals. Technical collection platforms are enormously important in today's intelligence world, but there will always be secrets we need a human to collect and clandestine operations that only a human can execute. That requires intensive training, an intensive team effort to support operations, and immense creativity and appetite for risk. It still, however, remains central to our mission. The ongoing revolution in artificial intelligence and machine learning and the avalanche of open source information in today's world creates new opportunities for our analysts. When harnessed properly, AI can find patterns and trends in vast amounts of open source and clandestinely acquired data that the human mind can't, freeing up our officers to focus on what they do best, providing reasoned judgments and insights on what matters most to policymakers and what means most for our interests. Our adversaries are moving fast to exploit open source information, and we have to do it faster and better than they do. Another key priority, and my most profound responsibility as director, is to invest in the people of our agency. While mastery of emerging technologies will shape our future in many ways, it is the remarkable men and women at the heart of CIA who will always drive it forward. They've been operating at an incredible tempo for more than 2 decades, since the terrible attacks of 9/11, and we're determined to provide them the support they need and deserve. We've completely revamped our in-house medical team, sent more medical officers out to the field, strengthened programs for families and 2 career couples, and appointed our first ever chief well-being officer. We're also looking for more ways to attract and retain technological talent, improving pay packages and encouraging more flexible career patterns so that officers can move into the private sector and later return to CIA. We're also making progress toward a more diverse workforce, taking full advantage of the richness of American society. For an intelligence service stretched across a very diverse world, that is not only the right thing to do for Americans, but also the smart thing. This past year, we reached historic highs in hiring women and minority officers. Perhaps even more importantly, we promoted into our senior ranks the highest percentages of women and minority officers in our 75-year history. Our final priority in this new era is to deepen our intelligence partnerships around the world and renew our commitment to intelligence diplomacy. At its core, the intelligence profession is about human interactions, and there is no substitute for direct contact to deepen ties with our closest allies, communicate with our fiercest adversaries, and cultivate everyone in between. In the nearly 46 trips I've taken overseas in my 2.5 years as director, I've run the gamut of those relationships and challenges. Sometimes it's more convenient for intelligence officers to navigate difficult terrain or deal with historic enemies where diplomatic contact might connote formal recognition. That's why the president sent me to Kabul in late August of 2021 to engage the Taliban leadership just prior to our final withdrawal. Sometimes intelligence ties can provide ballast in relationships full of political ups and downs. And sometimes intelligence diplomacy can encourage convergence of interests, support the efforts of policymakers and diplomats, and enhance competitive advantages. Our allies from the Five Eyes network to our other treaty partners across NATO and the Indo-Pacific are the bedrock of our intelligence diplomacy. No relationship is stronger or more trusting than our alliance with Britain and SIS. That's a point that my friend C and I have reinforced to our workforces in 2 unusual joint town hall discussions in recent months in Langley and in Vauxhall. I've experienced that reality ever since I trudged up to Ditchley Park from the Oxford bus all those years ago. I saw it as a diplomat in our collaboration with British diplomats and intelligence officers to persuade Muammar Gaddafi to get out of the business of terrorism and give up his rudimentary nuclear program. An adventure full of strange meetings in the middle of the night, in the middle of the desert with Gaddafi, to this day the strangest leader I've ever met. I saw it during secret nuclear talks with the Iranians and in the tangled dangers of Iraq and Afghanistan. And I saw that remarkable intelligence partnership in the run-up to Putin's war in Ukraine, where it got a little lonely for the two of us, way out on a limb in our public predictions of the coming storm. It is comforting to face this transformed world together and to learn from one another as we transform our services. And it is truly an honor to highlight that partnership here at Ditchley, where so much of the transatlantic spirit found its spark. Thank you so much.